Welcome, welcome, Hans and Henrik. I'm returning to the book by David Peach from 1997 with the title Infinite Potential, The Life and Times of David Bohm. And I will read something from page 279. Bohm was now talking about a new superimplicate order. In the book Wholeness and the Implicate Order, he had proposed that our everyday world unfolds out of the underlying implicate order. The depths of the implicate can never be totally unfolded. It is the source of the explicate order, yet remains unconditioned by it. In his discussions with Bohm, the biologist Rupert Sheldrake objected that this duality sounded a little like a reformulation of the Platonic ideas. A particular share, the explicate, is the manifestation of an ideal share, that is the implicate, that has no material existence. Authors found the relationship between implicate and explicate order to be curiously one-sided. The implicate chooses to manifest itself in the theater of the explicate. It does not witness its own display. An explicate drama is played out in the world of space and time, yet is never carried back to inform the implicate. So Hans and Henrik, what do you think about Sheldrake's objection that is only a Platonic, is only a reformulation of the Platonic idea? The implicate, is it so you have the share somewhere in the Platonic world? So
if I take it right, the implicit could be like the ideas in the Platonic world, and the explicit is the world of the senses then, somehow.
Yes. That was Sheldrake's objection.
Very interesting point, actually. Well, it's two things that's similar to Plato. But there's some small differences. I don't know where to start really, but I understand what Sheldrake takes it. I might just say the same thing before reading Bohm as well. Very interesting, actually, not half bad. Well, the explicit forms are not imperfect in any way. That's a difference, I'd say. The explicit it's not deviation of the implicit in Bohm's theory, like in Plato, where everything of the senses is a deviation, something made a little bit worse, not as perfect. And another difference could be that the implicit is, Bohm never says that's perfect. It's more a potentiality. It's not perfection. It's not a real hierarchy here, like there is in Plato. The implicit is not better than the explicit. This is the co-working of the implicit and the explicit.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, that also, that the implicit becomes the explicit and the explicit becomes the implicit. It's not a one-way street. So
yes, myself.
Otherwise, you would end up like in a word game or something. What is a chair?
And I would say, why postulate implicit share somewhere there in the heavens or wherever? There is really no need. I would say instead that the implicit instead is the, as you Hans perhaps would have said, is the space around the share. That is the implicit, perhaps, although it creates some false marginalization, as if the space around the share is less significant than the chair itself.
Oh yeah. That's a very good example. You can also say that the chair and the space are the implicit, and it takes the explicit form of being a chair together with a negative marginalized. Because one could say, this is a little bit crude to say that one always loses something in the explicit. That's not correct. But just to give a hint at what Bohm is pointing to, one could say there's a bit of a loss. So the potentiality, the chair and the space around it, before it becomes chair, was a bit broader, it's a little bit more potentiality, and then it sort of narrowed down to chair. But somewhere in that alley, I think it's somewhere, yeah. It's not half bad, yeah. But I think Sheldrake opinion is very interesting as well, because it could be perceived that way, Bob. It's open. It's in the way of describing things. Bohm has opened up for a lot of misunderstanding, but he doesn't have a choice. He needs to have this very loose explanation. He's using metaphors and he makes pictures, and as we know, as the channel has a symbol, a picture that's an ambigram, it could be taken in different ways. And Sheldrake is absolutely correct. I think absolutely, yes, Bohm could be taken as being Platonic, but I'd say that's not what he means. It doesn't strike me that way. But of course, but it's very interesting. And Sheldrake is somebody I read a lot. And you can see he tries to avoid a little bit that in his ideas.
I would think that if you take this analogy with the chair, you proposing that there is an autonomic reality.
Oh yeah.
So, but you have to always have the point of view of the observer. So I'm the observer. I look at the chair.
Yeah.
In this case, the point where I'm focusing my eyes is the explicit, while the other side of the chair is the implicit.
Yeah.
So this observer, Rupert Sheldrake's, it doesn't really make sense. There is no chair hanging around there somewhere else.
No.
There is only one chair,
Yeah.
and it depends on us where we put our eyes. That is the explicit, the joke. Perhaps the shadows can also be the implicate, or the explicit, or where I don't focus my eyes. So it's everything about me, the observer.
Yeah, it's a little bit about the Klein bottle. Is space going into space? So even though the chair come out of space, it remains space in one way, open. And depending who's watching, who's seeing, who's doing the observance. I see the chair or the space chair or whatever as an ambigram. And here comes me, and here comes Kalle, here comes Henry. And that's the collapse or the superposition. We have something explicit. Could that be something? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and always, of course, we have this too, of course. And also in this case, it's everything depends where I put my eyes on, which part of the chair. Yes, everything it depends on the observer, and then in that case we can completely forget about the Platonic world. It's unnecessary postulation.
Yes.
I'm thinking Sheldrake's point here, could it also be said the same for archetypes?
Yeah,
archetypes.
Wow, good point, Henry. Yes.
The Platonic, in the Platonic world exist the archetypes.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of question, I think.
It's very similar, and that's very common as well. It's very common. The Sheldrake thing, thank you very much, Kalle. I haven't heard before. I think when I first read Bohm, which was ages ago, I didn't know much about Plato then. It was before I studied philosophy. But I think I took it as Platonic. I think that's depending on the maturity of my intellect and also my mindset. I wanted to see objects. And then you see objects. It's the focal setting, as I mentioned before. So, yeah, definitely. Archetypes, And it's very similar, Jung and Bohm in this aspect, because the archetypes are, well, very implicit, aren't they? And the explicit form is when we are embody them somehow and making them vivid or come to life. Very good.
So it sounds like this Platonic idea doesn't takes concern of any observer. It's outside the existence somewhere, outside the observer.
Yeah, it's. I would say this: when you in yourself taking away the observer, when you read Jung, you will see it as a Platonic. But if you're in with yourself, have the subject, so to speak, you could understand it the way Jung wanted it to. And it's probably the same with Sheldrake here. His theory has like half and half subject with it, I would say. His form theory, it's half subject is there, but I'd say it's not really there actually. And he wants to make an objective science, and Sheldrake is on the battlefield with objective science as well on equal terms. I think I mentioned that before to you, Henry, that he does his battle with classical physics and classical biologists, and there he's bound to lose, but he wants to play in that arena. Whereas Bohm and Jung, no, they want to have the subject there. It should be part of the whole thing. But also myself, when I read Bohm the first time, I didn't want to have any subject going on, destroying things or anything. I didn't even know what it was. And I took it to be like more or less Platonic. And partly because, partly that reason I liked it. One other reason I didn't like Bohm. But partly it was the reason I liked it. So it's the maturity of the mind and everything. And maybe Sheldrake is showing up a little bit of wanting to evade the subject as well, because the subject doesn't play a very big part in his later theory. I don't know if the book was from 79.
This is for 97.
97.
Yes, discography.
Yeah, but the actual quote, do you know when it?
No, I don't know. It's not mentioned.
Let's assume that he already started with his book, Sheldrake, by then. So there's no subject there. The forms are by themselves. His structures, his what he call them, Henrik? His field.
Yeah, these fields of what you call them.
They live their own lives, so to speak. I'm explaining to Kalle, I don't think he's read Sheldrake before, but they live their own lives and do their own structuring. And I think Sheldrake somewhere on the line started with crystals, because the first time you make a new crystal, it's very hard to make it. But then for some crazy reason, it becomes easier. So then he starts thinking, he uses metaphor, the crystal. Becomes easier and easier to make it wherever you are in the world. Doesn't matter if you're in Antarctica or in Japan. It gets easier and easier, and that's a weird thing. But it's subjectless. His theory is more or less subjectless. There's no subject battling there. He wants to have an objective theory. He wants it to be objectively tested and all that. Yeah, very interesting.
So he calls it morphic energy field or morphogenetic fields and
morphological field. Morphological field, yeah. Fields of
resonance
shape.
Theory.
But the end, the difference between Platonic forms and archetype, so archetype is something that we have inside us, we have in common, I have together with you. So that is the subject, so to say, archetype takes and consider the subject.
Should one be really mean to poor old Sheldrake here, one could actually point the finger towards him and say that, yes, his morphological field are changing and never the same, but they act in his theory, even if they are changing, as sort of Platonic forms. because they have no connection with the subject. They're not
Yeah.
observant.
It's classical. Let's say like a classical viewpoint, standpoint still. It's independent morphogenetic fields, that they are completely independent in some way.
Yeah, it takes the subject out of the equation, and I'd say even harsher. It could be that Sheldrake didn't even understand what Bohm was on about. I think that's objection that it's the Platonic forms is a bit.
It sounds like Bohm's theory of objectivity is that you have to take subject and object together.
Yeah.
Then it can become objective or something.
Yeah.
Taking into consideration both. But from Sheldrake, he's still talking classical physics, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but it sounds like that.
Yeah, he since he himself hasn't taken the subject into account when he does his research or whatever, his thinking, his philosophy, he hasn't done that job. He hasn't done the journey, as Bohm said. You're bound to perceive everything in that order. It's a little bit like quantum physics. You're very much into not having the subject partaking. Even if you read quantum physics, you're bound to call it some sort of classical physics in a way. You're going to think intuitively in your body it's already been decided somehow. And the body is a strong thing. It would ignore what the head says. You will still believe, I always probably decided somewhere along the lines. John Bell was wrong. I think that. And they can say it. They can use those words and say that, well, I agree with John Bell, but in their body, in their system, they would still think it was probably decided somehow. I met people like that. Not the quantum professor I'm talking to now, but a former guy. He was a bit like that. And sometimes in the discussions, I try to pinpoint that. Don't you see what a difference it makes? I said, yeah. It's a bit lukewarm. You're met. That was very good with Sheldrake there. Great stuff.
Let me read a little bit more. So, so here David Beach writes, suppose you shoot down spaceships on a video game. These spaceships have no material existence. They are only moving buttons of light on a television screen. The display itself is a manifestation of the underlying program within the computer. The ships are analogous to the explicit order. They are a surface appearance that subsists on the underlying program, analogous to the implicate order. And what of the game player? He or she responds not to the underlying program, but to the appearance of the ships on the screen. The operator takes actions based on a perception of the explicit order, and as buttons are pressed, they affect the underlying program, the implicate order. Clearly, the human operator plays the role of the super implicate order. End quote. Quotation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the human being is part of the implicate order. And maybe it could be expressed this way. And which is a cumbersome way of expressing the whole thing. It could be that Bohm's way of putting in the subject into the equation is this implicit explicit, because it is the subject that is making it being explicit, that thereby being part of the implicit, but also in the creation of the explicit, making himself explicit and making what is being observed explicit. And that's the whole movement, so to speak. And that's his way of going about. Now, of course, he wasn't thinking that way. This is not how he got to that conclusion. but it's a cumbersome way of putting it to put it on equal terms of what Sheldrake is saying, so we can compare the two. Where Sheldrake, he can't get his head around this. How could the subject be part of it? It shouldn't be. I'm putting words in the mouth of Sheldrake now. Naughty me, you can't do that, but it serves a purpose to sort of help me understand what's happening here. Because I said before that Sheldrake is completely stranded in the classical physics. You remember that, Henry? I said that many times.
Yes, yes.
He's doing his battle with the classical physicists and his biologists and not earning any credits whatsoever. He's not winning any battles.
No, he doesn't take in account the person making the observation.
No, his theory doesn't allow it. It doesn't allow a partaking subject. And I think intuitively he wants to get rid of that. And then he does not proceed to be objective, as Bohm said. You want to be objective? For God's sake, take in the subject. It's part and parcel of the whole thing. The subject cannot be taken out of the equation. It's very important. And one thing I would never say, I don't think this is caused about wish from Sheldrake's part to be part of the regular, but because biology is, you have to be classical. Biology is to this day more or less classical. Now you have to be classical. I don't think that's the reason that Sheldrake is pursuing this way of going about things that's not so serving his own purpose. I think he doesn't really understand more. I think that's points to that. But that's my guess.
Yes.
That's my guess.
So I would say that we round up here and conclude that Sheldrake is a Platonist.
Well, it's
not a Platonist, but
yeah, but this with Platonism, you can say I don't want to be. It doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter. It's not. You can't choose there.
There is no objective reality.
There, of course, there is an objective reality, but if you don't understand that objective reality, you're bound to be a Platonic somehow, to some degree, I think, because this is a journey, and Bohm writes about this journey in the holographic paradigm. It's a journey. It's not like one day you understand it, one day you don't. It's a journey, and of course, he's very loose in his descriptions, and explicit and implicit. Yeah, they can lend themselves to any explanation because they are so loose in their definition. It's actually new words to be learned. But it's a point in that he wants to describe something that cannot be used, cannot be done with ordinary words. And when it comes to new words that don't have a clear definition, at least not originally, it's bound to create misunderstanding. That's built in the whole thing. You don't have a choice here. But his scheme is just too great. He wants to transfer it to more or less ordinary language, bar, implicit, explicit, the whole movement, to make the mathematical insights from quantum physics that really can't be transferred to ordinary language. He wants to transfer them somehow. And that was the gift to Sheldrake, and Sheldrake didn't appreciate it. I was almost going to say you can lead a donkey to the water, but you can't get it to drink. That's a bit tough on Sheldrake. That's not what I mean. I take that back.
But let me resume the video game analogy.
Yeah,
so you have first the spaceships on the screen.
Yeah.
They are explicit according to Bohm, and then the underlying program that is implicit. While the observer or the player, he is or she is is of the super implicate order. So there are really three levels in this new Bohm theory.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. So the observer, the player, is super implicate. So the super is a very good word
Mhm.
because the human beings is really the one who should be there, super everything,
Mhm.
like the superhuman of Nietzsche and so on. So we have to have a human being be above everything, super.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good word.
Yeah, I think that's what's happening because first you have one level, you have implicit, and then you have explicit, and you have implicit again. And this is this movement that is the holy movement. And of course, it's impossible for the subject not be part of that and playing the role, playing a very important role, a role that cannot be, even if you want to, as Sheldrake wants to, take it away. It's there. And if you're going to make a theory, you need to take account of it. Otherwise, you're going to end up having problems. And I said Sheldrake's have problems with his ideas because he never told anyone how these morphological fields are moving from one place to another. What's that power? What is it that makes that happen? Well, the subject, I say. But he doesn't want to infer the subject because it's going to soil his whole theory. It's going to look awkward. Well, that's my idea of the whole thing. What do you think, Henry?
Now I'm back to the question of why Sheldrake thinks Bohm's theory is Platonic. I mean, when we have the ambigram, we like see two different faces or something.
Yeah.
When we see one face, the other is still there, and what changes it. It's the hollow movement, right? So I wonder if Sheldrake means that somehow the Platonic idea is that the hollow movement is Platonic and is steered from another place or something. The steering of the hollow movement is some force, Platonic force that is controlling the hollow movement. It's not directly about the implicit explicit thing. It's rather what is it that orders it to happen or something.
And he doesn't explain that. And this is very typical because if you want to have a classical philosophical theory, some sort of central perspective, there's always going to be something you want to hide or you push out into the background. Well, it's the same thing with the mathematical laws governing the universe. We say the universe is working perfectly well because mathematics is seeing to the laws to be working like a machinery of some sort.
Yeah, there's a pattern.
Well, then you can, and then you can ask, who does this calculation? Where is it done? By which force? Where is the place for the calculation of the mathematical laws so that they work? And this is so obvious. I didn't think about it because I think it was 2 years ago I heard it the first time. And I thought, this is nonsense. But then this is what happens with this theory. You come to think of it, and it takes some time. It took me a couple of months, and I started thinking, yeah, they trick themselves into believing they don't have to explain what makes the mechanical laws do themselves. They just say they're mathematical, and that's the end of it. But the math is somewhere else.
Yeah,
it's a little bit like, it's like a little bit like a kid, and there's no cookies in the kitchen. The mom asked the kid, I mean, who took the cookies? It wasn't me. Begs the question, who was it then? Since you're the only one who've been in the kitchen. It's the same with the mathematical laws. They happen somewhere else. I don't want to answer that. Well, actually, probably the person never thought about it. I bet you Max Steger might never thought about that. Where should all the mathematical laws be calculated? What place? With which computer power? And how big will the computer be? It will be enormous. It'd be much bigger than the universe, I think.
Yeah, as long as you don't take into accord the subject. It has to be something like that, an enormous computer somewhere.
Yeah,
that does this.
you will always end up with problems also in your theory when you take the subject out. It's not only in reality, it's not only with experimentation, it's already in the theory, this big problem. Something is hidden, something is marginalized.
Okay, I think we'll need to wrap it up here. Or would you say?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henrik.
Maybe we take another one tomorrow, somewhere in the afternoon. Are you free tomorrow, Henry?
Maybe, I'm not sure yet. Hopefully.
No.
Okay, we thank you. Stop
Thank you.
again.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.